Good morning. My name is Valerie Stern, and this is the Sterne Report. I'm so excited to have Trustee Lareesa Quintana as my guest today on the Sterne Report. Not only is she one of the youngest trustees to ever serve on the Austin ISD Board, she's also an AISD graduate, part of the very first graduating class of the Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders, one of the district's flagship choice schools. Her professional journey has been deeply rooted in public service with experience as a Texas Capitol staffer, campaign manager for Councilwoman Vanessa Fuentes, digital organizer, and governmental affairs consultant, as well as past service on the boards of the American Youth Works, the New Philanthropists, and the Young Hispanic Professional Association of Austin. I'm thrilled to speak with her today about her full circle journey from student to policymaker and to hear her thoughts on where we go from here. Welcome, Trustee Quintana.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So could you start by telling us a bit about your early experience in Austin ISD, which elementary schools you attended, and what stands out most vividly from those early years?
Sure. So I moved to Austin in 2006. I was living in northern Arizona where I lived with my parents, and then after some rocky times, I was in foster care. So I moved here the summer after fifth grade. So I started sixth grade at Pierce Middle School. Well, what was then Pierce Middle School is now Bertha Sadler Means. Um, and I loved it, honestly. I came from a very small rural town. This was 2006. So this was, we were still receiving students who had to leave their homes because of Hurricane Katrina. And so there was, a definite, culture shock, but I loved it. Honestly, I feel like I thrived. Um, and in retrospect, I do notice, things that I know now as an adult. We had a theater production that we had to stop halfway through because, we didn't have enough money for materials or, things to make our props and sets and things like that. But I still loved it. I loved, being in a big school. Like I said, I came from a very rural, small town. So we had grades K through 8 in one school for two towns. And then we had one high school also for three towns. So it was very exciting to me. And I loved it. Yeah.
Great. Were there particular moments, positive or challenging, that shaped how you think about education and equity today? I know you just mentioned the theater production that had to be stopped because you guys didn't have enough funds for that.
Yeah. Um, I think I definitely could tell there was a distinction between the Ann Richards School, of course, and Pierce Middle School. Once I started at the Ann Richards School, just the very next year, I was only at Pierce for sixth grade. Um, there was a big difference, and I couldn't at the time, I was 12. I couldn't quite articulate like what that difference was or really ascribe any sort of meaning to that difference. But now, as an adult, in retrospect, um, being on the board has really put my experience and childhood into perspective. I didn't realize that I grew up different than a lot of kids in town, right? Because I lived off of Cameron Road and 51st, um, just down the street from Northeast High School now. And, I went to church with all the same kids, and my aunt worked at Walgreens, and, so it wasn't until really I was on the board this past year that have seen that, there are kids who have different educational experiences, just like I did.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. So, how did your experience as a student in Austin shape your sense of belonging and possibility?
Um, I love Austin. I think, being here, being a first generation college graduate, um, my aunt in particular really depended on my public school to give me the tools and resources I needed to to follow whatever it was I wanted to do.
Hmm.
Um, and she trusted them and she trusted me to to kind of decide for myself what path I wanted to go down. And so, public education in this town means everything to me. I wouldn't be here without it. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to serve on the board.
Amazing. Okay, so you were part of I think, the first graduating class from Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders. It's a flagship campus with a powerful mission for preparing girls for leadership in college, career, and life. I have one of my daughters as a graduate, and I have another sophomore more there now. So I love that school, and I see some of, the challenges. So can you just explain what it was like to attend ARS in those early days?
In the early days, it was amazing because I hadn't quite hit puberty yet. And then once like eighth, ninth grade rolled around, that's just a hard time to be alive in general as a young person. And then to be a girl. And then, I had a lot of hard times at home at the same time. Um, but at the end of the day, it was still, a place where I felt safe, a place where I felt valued, a place where I know that my teachers believed in me and and that just went such a long way, especially for a student like me who, had so much to juggle and to think about.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what kinds of opportunities or experiences at ARS helped shape your sense of self, leadership, and voice?
Um, we were always encouraged to kind of speak on our own behalves. We would have different people come to the campus and we would give them tours. I'm sure you've seen one of these tours. And it was led by, us. And we would tell them about our experience in this class or in that class or, doing this unique activity or that. And so we always got to speak about our own experience and, like what we liked. And we weren't very shy about saying what we didn't like either.
Hmm.
And so that was always encouraged. And every year, it's changed now, but back then we had something called the birthday bash, and it was in September. And it was this big fundraiser to celebrate the birthday of Ann Richards, and we would have this big party, and we as students were invited, and got to talk to. In retrospect, now I realize we're some big Democratic names in this town, um, and I think that was is you know was really fantastic to kind of be treated, as an adult
Hmm.
and to be trusted.
Hmm.
Um, and then, all of the other amazing things like a yearly college tour, touring every college, understanding, how college applications worked, how the process worked, what schools were thinking about, um, talking to college reps. It just all of that. I mean, knowledge is power, right? And the fact of the matter is that I lived in a household who didn't know what a FAFSA was. My aunt didn't understand why AP tests were important or what the
Right.
difference was, right? And so just all of that general knowledge, and being able to speak up and advocate for myself, was, I mean, paramount.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I notice about every single Ann Richards girl I ever meet is that they have such presence and confidence to speak. And I think it's because from very early, there's an expectation that you get up and speak to people and adults. And yeah, it's just an amazing quality of the Ann Richards students. So the school has often been celebrated for excellence, but as you know from my recent policy brief, it's also facing questions about who has access to that excellence. The school used to reflect the diversity of the district much more. Like for the first 10 years when Principal Goka was the principal, I think she really advocated and made sure that the student body reflected the district. But in the last few years, there's been a widening gap between eco-DIS students and non-eco-DIS students, even though our district has about 50-50. Non-eco-DIS students are 68% of the school now, and eco-DIS students are 32%, which is seems like not a lot. Oh, maybe it's the other way. 38% are eco-DIS and 62, but it's not aligned with the vision of the school. So how do you think, how do you think about that? And do you think that the district should be doing more to protect, like who has access to that school and who doesn't?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think that's we should be thinking about that for every, magnet or choice program that we have in the district. Um, I will say though, I feel like there are some other things that might account for that gap. Um, and Richards now has a reputation. 10 or 15 years ago when I was in school, we nobody really like knew what to expect or knew, what our day to day looked like. But I think now there are a lot of graduates and people who, went to the school and decided it wasn't for them and all of those things. And so I think, parents and students might realize the time commitment that comes um, from going to school there as far as homework is concerned and out of school, time commitments. Um, and some parents, and students just don't want that for
Hmm.
themselves,
Hmm.
which is totally okay. I think we are now living in a different world. Austin's a much bigger city than it was than when I was in school those first 10 years. Um, and parents might not be okay with putting their kid on a bus to go. I grew up, like I said, on the east side, northeast side, and I woke up at 6 a.m. to be at school by 9 a.m. essentially.
Yeah.
And so, parents might not be comfortable with that.
Hmm.
Also, we have to think about the immigration situation and climate that we are in now. I know that
Hmm.
there are a lot of families who are just keeping their kids home in general,
Hmm.
neighborhood schools even.
Hmm.
So even putting their kid on a bus to go across town, and if they don't have a car or a way to get to them, that could be another big factor. Uniforms are costly. That's another factor. Like there are so many things that the district can absolutely, address. We could do scholarships for uniforms and things like that, or take away uniforms altogether, right?
Hmm.
Um, but but yeah, I think there are other things that are contributing um to that as well.
Yeah. Okay. One second. Yeah, I think that the PTA now it has one of like this exchange program. So like when you grow out of your uniform, you can donate it and then they like help share. So there is some of that. But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of things going into like who feels like they even want to go to the school. And I know that the last principal told me that they didn't even have enough economically disadvantaged students applying. And last year they did a really great job with like outreach and really targeting Title I schools and coordinating with their counselors for applications. And they had a day where they had like this open house and they had hundreds of girls from Title I schools visiting, which was great. I think that was a great effort. Um, Other districts, I did my dissertation on choice schools in districts like Austin, and other districts, things that they did were like they would look at whatever like the cutoff, like for Ann Richards, it might be like I don't know what their cutoff is. I think it's like you have to have passed not necessarily meets, but approaches on your fourth grade star and have good to know like behavior like whatever the cutoff is the district and these other districts would identify a huge set of girls who or kids who met those criteria and then they would send individualized letters to their parents and say you qualify you should apply and then they would track those students and like communicate with the administrators and the counselors at their schools and say look here's the list of kids who could qualify for these programs and are like look to see which schools were actually getting kids to apply in the pipeline and track that pipeline. So I think that there is more that the district could be doing and also like have these two buckets. I think for a while it was they were giving priority to students who lived in a Title I elementary school zone, even if they didn't attend that Title I elementary school. And like my kids live in a Title I elementary school and attended that zone, but they shouldn't have got that priority. They should have been two buckets that are like a bucket for eco dis and a bucket for non-eco dis, so that no matter how big how overrepresented non-eco dis kids get, they can still protect a certain number of seats for economically disadvantaged students. Um, so those are some things that I think the district could be doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I do I I do question this like process though of like taking certain kids out of schools and putting them in different schools.
Hmm.
And I don't have the answers to that. It's like I said, it's just like simply a question of
Yeah.
um I think that that's kind of what we see with our charter schools that are in our neighborhoods too, right? Is that they're, taking the kids who might not have behavioral issues or the kids who are performing well on STAR and things like that, and kind of making those asks to parents as well. I mean, as we know, like charter schools will call you on the phone and like knock on your door, and
Yeah.
they do a
Yep.
really
Yep.
good
Yep.
job
Yep.
of advertising themselves. Um, and so I just think, especially in this time when we're having all these conversations about neighborhood schools, I just wonder, how, when we do those things, how are we also at the same time making sure that our neighborhood school is properly resourced?
Yeah, totally. Like we have to do like if there are choice schools, we need to make sure that they're well resourced, but so are our neighborhood schools.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I think about the fact that like I wanted to go to Ann Richards because I didn't I didn't believe in Reagan, right? But like
Mhm.
that should not I should go to Ann Richards for all the reasons why I want, but if I decided to go to Reagan, I should have had just as much access and opportunity there than
Mhm.
I did at Ann Richards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like that whole like yeah, there is, a body of research that says that when there's concentrated poverty, it's harder, to get resources and harder for kids to reach a certain achievement level. Not that, and it's not about proximity to whiteness but it's about resources and about I think the like poverty can be traumatic, right? And there's a lot of things that people are dealing with. And if like the majority of the kids or a lot of kids in the school are dealing with that, then that school just needs not just a little bit more resources, like a lot more resources to address that. And our current system, whether it's the state or the district or federally, we're not like our current system is not allocating those resources properly. And so then the question is, do we try to integrate some schools so that there's less of this like concentrated poverty and concentrated wealth so that more kids have access to resources, or do we just need to focus on directing more resources to where they're needed?
I think the latter. Um, I think that it's hard to it's hard to think about proximity to wealth without thinking about proximity to whiteness.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that, in every instance, I'm sure, there may be some way to untangle those two, but just like in the broad scheme of things, I'm not sure that that's possible, especially in this town. Um, I would love to see a world in which, our kids can stay in their neighborhoods and have just as good of an education on the west side that they should be having on the east
Mhm.
side. Everybody said it a million times and it's true. Your zip code shouldn't determine what, kind of schools you go to or resources you have. Unfortunately, that's just not the city that we live in.
Yeah. or the world or the state. Yeah. Um, so you were still quite young when you decided to run for school board. What motivated you to take that leap?
Um, I think a lot of things did. Like we discussed, I grew up here. I benefited from our school district and from our leaders. Um, and it has always felt very personal to me and has always been, a dream of mine to serve and to give back in the city that, gave me so much. And I take it very seriously. It's truly an honor, and a privilege. And having gone to the Anna Richard School and learning, although we were a STEM school, and learning, about her leadership, in the policymaking process, that is what I really, resonated with as a young kid and growing up, and just seeing, how the world is changing, and how representation is important. Representation is everything. And so when it came time to make this decision, I felt like I was a true representative of my district who, look like me, speak the same language as me, have some of the same cultural values as me, as well as the lived experience of having, grown up in this town that is changing rapidly. I think it's really important to have some hometown voices, who went to our schools on the board, because I think that my community, rightfully so, is feeling as if the city's moving on without them.
Hmm.
Um, and so I wanted to kind of be a voice to say, like, no, we hear you. Like, I'm still here. I know you're still here. Um, and just, I just knew that was really important.
Yeah. So what kind of response did you get from your community when you announced your candidacy?
Oh, just overwhelming love. I was very nervous, because I am young. I thought I would get pushed back on that, but really people have been amazing. I've met, a lot of people, obviously having grown up here and gone to school here and gone to college just in Georgetown. And, I worked in the Capitol and City Hall. I waited tables, in college and all of those things. And so it's just amazing to see like how all of these people from every different corner of my life just came together and were just like, absolutely 100%, we're behind you. What do you need? So it was truly amazing and humbling and overwhelming.
That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. So what advice would you give to other young people who want to step into public service but don't see themselves represented?
That's why you should. Is if you don't see yourself at the table, if you don't see yourself or hear your voice, that is absolutely why you should run. It's, it's really important that, unfortunately, we live in a time where they're not just handing out microphones, right, to
Hmm.
anyone to hear them, and to give them the volume that they need. And so you really have to go and you have to fight and you have to take it, and you just have to know that you're not alone. Um, just like how I found out when I ran, I realized I wasn't alone. You're really not alone, and you just have to ask for help.
Yeah. Okay, so what has surprised you most about serving as a trustee on the Austin ISD board?
Um, Not a whole lot.
No, I mean, it's a lot of work, right? It's so much work.
Yeah, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of work. I knew that going in. I guess, I worked in the House, I worked at City Hall, and so I worked with bosses who were directly writing policy, right? And so like they had their own words in there. They had everything, you know, written and syntaxed as they wanted it, to be in law. And what I try to explain to people most often is that I don't have that ability, right? I'm not writing policy that is going to dictate how the district runs. My job and position is really just about, setting the vision and the goals. And then it's up to our superintendent to really be in charge of executing that, right?
Mhm.
And putting together a process and a day-to-day to make that vision happen.
Right.
Um, and so that's what is, I guess, a little surprising is that, I came from a very different world, where the policymakers are extremely hands-on, and even writing the laws or whatever it may be. Um, and as a school board member, according to, state code, our authority is a little limited. And so
Right.
that's hard because, it's not typically what I had worked with previously. So I guess, yeah, just learning the full scope of my authority and making sure not to go outside of that.
Right. Okay. So, what has been the most rewarding part of the work so far?
The kids. It is so great when I get to spend time with kids and Um, that is the very best part is when I'm on campuses and I'm talking with kids. Adults are just so much more complicated. And so yeah, the kids are definitely the best part. And talking with staff, teachers and parents. And, like I said, I have a very limited, authority here, but there are some things I can do. And so when I get to do those really small things that like maybe, isn't like turning the whole thing upside down, but, just one small thing that could make a difference in someone's school or in someone's family, um, those small wins are really what get me through.
Amazing. Yep. So what has been the hardest part, especially when community priorities, district finances, and equity commitments come into tension?
Yeah, all of that. All of that is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, especially over this last year, I feel like our district has been hit with something huge and monumental every single month. Um, I haven't even officially been in office for a year yet. And the hardest part is existing in a larger system and institution that was not made to serve people who look like me,
Hmm.
right? Like we are existing in a process and a system that was not made to benefit Black and brown people,
Hmm.
period.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to, do the work that we want to do is because we're moving upstream, we're trying to dismantle, rebuild the system and, work our way in it like all at the same time. There's so many moving pieces. And it's hard not to feel like there are times when, the systems who are supposedly there to, help you and uplift you, it's hard not to feel like they're against you
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the hardest thing is because you think like, man, we're all on the same team, right? Like we're all here for the kids and to educate our kids and to give them, every opportunity to make the world a better place for you and me, right? Like this
Hmm.
isn't, a selfish thing. This is like we are investing. This is our future. And it's just like it just sometimes it just feels we're not all on the same team.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. So I wrote a brief on the disparate impact of school closures recently. So there were originally 13 schools on the list for school closures, and after community feedback, there was a revised plan was presented with some changes, but no schools were taken off the list. And then a few days later, the superintendent sent out an email saying that they were taking Briker Woods, Maplewood, and Palm off of the closure list. Briker Woods and Maplewood were some of the only non-Title I schools on the closure list. In the original closure plan, EcoDis students were about 1.4 times as likely to be in closed schools as non-EcoDis students. But in this new plan, that disparity rose to 1.7 times as likely to be in a closed school. In the original plan, Hispanic students were about 1.6 times as likely as white students to be in a closed school. And in the new plan, with those three schools taken off, they are 2.1 times as likely to be in a closed school. And Black students were about 1.6 times as likely as white students in the original plan to be in a closed school. And now in the new plan, they're about 2.2 times as likely as white students to be in a closed school. So, what are your thoughts about this abrupt change? That they had this plan and then a second plan was presented, and then suddenly that these three schools were taken off, and how have that's affected the disparities and who's been impacted in closures?
Well, I mean, I think you just clearly stated what that disparity looks like.
Hmm.
Um, you know, again, adults are so complicated. That's what it is in
Hmm.
this process and in this work is that I will say that the events that led up to the superintendent, kind of taking closures off the table if they weren't connected to TAPS. Um, the information that we as a board learned, um, I would not have been able to confidently vote in favor of the work being done. And so I do think that he did the right thing in separating the two. It's just so happens that the schools that were closing that weren't involved in TAPS are these, are Maplewood, Brackenwoods, and Palm. And it's just it's unfortunate for sure. There's still a lot of work to be done. This does slow down our timeline. This does not negate the fact that, we are in a $20 million deficit. We had to take out, a $40 million loan to pay our bills this month.
Hmm.
Um, that, we have around 20,000 empty seats in our district. Um, that funding from the state and the federal government is always up in the air.
Hmm.
It doesn't change. Like this process still has to happen. We told our superintendent, we said, we want you to look at how we can realign our boundaries. We want you to look at how, we can fill our empty seats. We want you, you know, to think about how to get us out of this budget deficit without, cutting teacher pay and all of these things. And so this was the plan that he brought forward, and it's not a perfect plan. Um, but it is, something that me as a trustee and the community can kind of work with and mold to say, this is what we want here, and we can give a little here and take more here. But that process was just upended. Um, and that's, what's difficult, right? Is that like as a trustee, I can't monitor the process of these really big plans and how they're coming to conclusions and things like that. So when they bring us something like it's not my plan, right? Like I didn't write this plan.
Hmm.
When they bring us something, I think they really want to make sure that it's something that aligns with our values and our community values. And I think that the superintendent kind of looked at the situation and decided that he didn't think that it aligned with our values. Taking off those schools is just I don't know, I guess it's just a unfortunate coincidence that it, you know, that we're
Yeah, I
still
think
being hit just as hard.
yeah. It seems to me like when we like use these logics like like well which schools are not performing well on the state test? Well, we know that the state test is correlated, like poor performance is correlated with um high concentrations of low income students. And so if we use that logic, then we're going to continually put the burden of closures on communities that are already carrying other burdens. And the same thing when we say, well, we shouldn't close schools that have all their seats filled when we know that transfers and people both move into neighborhoods with schools that have concentrated wealth and whiteness and transfer to schools that are rated better or have concentrated wealth
Yeah.
and whiteness. And so then if we use those logics, then we're going to always burden certain
Yeah,
communities with closures and taking a sacrifice. And that's what happened in the last closure plan. And so, like, if we don't understand the history of and all of the reasons for why we've gotten here, then it's just going to be like, well, this is logical. This is the logical thing
totally.
to do. And so then then I don't know. What do you think how do we address that?
Yeah. I think, these are conversations that I have with the superintendent all the time. It probably in every conversation I have with him, it goes back to the historical context. And he understands that. He's from Austin. He went to school here. He grew up here. Um, but most recently, I think what has hit me the hardest is that in a city that is changing, in a nation that is changing, um, I think more Black and Brown people, especially people in my community who are Latino, are feeling erased.
Hmm.
You know, we're whatever you want to call it, progress or not, at the end of the day, like they're selling their generational homes on the east side to build, you know, multi-use whatever apartments. Um, and they're slowly starting to see the erasure of their legacy in this town,
Hmm.
which arguably is the reason why this city is as amazing as it is, right? Is because of the
Right.
contribution and the legacies of the Black and Brown people. And so even if it makes logical sense, like, hey, like this school's half empty, they have three Fs, we need to close it because it's going to put us all at risk of takeover, right? It doesn't erase the fact that we are only eliminating more of that, of Black and Brown people's identity, contribution, and legacy in the city. So I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And what do we do? I think we just have to be creative. I think as a community, we have to um, be open to, kind of reimagining our schools, and what that looks like. I mean, public school looks different in every state. I think that's the difficult part, is trying to figure out how we can progress with an ever-changing city while at the same time sustaining our contribution and legacy, um, and place in general. So yeah, I think it's going to come down to being, open-minded and creative. You know, when we think about like Whiting in my district, has three Fs, and we also have like 39 empty seats in that part of town. Something like making a KA at Mendez is an idea, right? Like they're just moving across the street, which is not ideal at all. Still not fair to them. Um, but they're still in Dove Springs and in their neighborhood. And um, you know, we know that a lot of families who are choosing charter schools, a lot of those models are K-8. So we know that, families are already choosing this. So those are just one example of trying to be creative, trying to meet the moment while at the same time preserve our culture.
Right. Um, so we've talked about this a little bit, and I hear that you have some questions or maybe like I don't I'm not saying mistrust, but like you're not sold on the choice school model within the district. But we do have some choice schools in the district, like Ann Richards, Lassa, Keeling. We have choice programs that are application programs housed within certain schools, like McCallum Fine Arts, Lamar Fine Arts, and the different programs at Austin High. These tend to exacerbate inequity instead of increase access. And so I know that the superintendent said, like, we're not going to even talk about that yet, but do you think there's an appetite on the board to revisit some of the enrollment policies in these choice programs in schools to make them more equitable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this board is committed to always having a conversation about how we can make any process um more accessible to every student in the district. I do think, though, this conversation, as I said before, it has, um, you know, led to the conversation of how can we make our neighborhood schools more appealing to families. Some of the boundaries were changed, and there are Austin High students who normally went to Austin High, but who are now zoned to Crockett. And we've received a lot of emails from students and families who don't feel like they will fit in at Crockett, like that Crockett doesn't have what they would like to explore or engage in. And so, I think really listening to all of those communities and families and saying like, okay, well then what do you want? Like, how do we get that on Crockett's campus so that you will come to our school and you can see like how amazing our
Mhm.
school is.
Yeah, I mean, what led me into going back to do a PhD was looking at how segregated our schools were in Austin ISD. And in fact, and by some measures, our district is the most segregated district in the state because we have a diverse population, but it's like we have two different school systems within our district. Like specific, I think we should definitely look at our boundaries because Austin High in particular, if you look at the boundary right now, not the new one that they're proposing, but the one right now is like the most gerrymandered like boundary in the district to like capture as most the most concentrated whiteness and wealth as you can into from West Austin, but it doesn't make geographic sense to be busing people from Southwest Austin across like way up across the river. So I'm wondering how can we like encourage our friends and neighbors who I think profess values of inclusivity and anti-racism to like then like take the step and say like how can we build the best community that we can at Crockett or at Aikens or wherever instead of thinking that this isn't for me or I'm not going to fit in here or it's not going to be good for my kids.
Yeah, I would love to know that when you figure that out, please. Let me know.
Okay,
It
I'm
is,
trying.
I wish I had the answer. I think that, as a trustee who represents the East Side, all of my schools are Title One, except maybe Lhasa, because I do represent Lhasa. Um, these are the questions: is how do we make people care about something happening outside of their household? That's what
Mhm.
it is. And really, I don't know how to do that. We've been holding meetings, we've been inviting people, we've been listening to everyone. We've been trying to work with people, like saying, like what can we put on Crockett's campus, um, to excite you about going to school there. Um, but I do know that unless we all work together, we're all gonna fail together. And that I do know for a
Mhm.
fact.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep, I agree. And and then like it's interesting when you say like you're talking to people about what can we do to make you like buy into this. And this is like there's been this shift, I think, in the last 30 or 40 of years of like really thinking of schools as a product and parents and families as a consumer instead of like this is a public good that we all need to invest in. And so also like trying to untangle that. Like this is not something that you're buying into to get something back. This is a public good that we need to invest in for our whole society and that like making that switch. But it's really hard when the state grades, schools with an A to F, when you can buy into schools through real estate and your real estate property is tied to like the demographics of the school and all of that. It's all tied together to make it set up like it's a market when it shouldn't be a market, right? It should be a
Yeah,
public good. Um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so it's interesting. We are both pirates. Arr. I do that.
Let's.
Yeah, pirates. We both went to Southwestern. So, what was that experience like for you? And did you feel like your time at Ann Richards like helped prepare you for Southwestern and how that shaped your experience?
Um, it was lonely.
Yeah.
I was lonely.
Yep.
Southwestern is a wealthy school.
Yep.
Wealthy kids go to school there. I was not wealthy. I was on a scholarship. Um, and there weren't a ton of people who looked like me. Um, I lost both my parents when I was in high school, and so I was an independent student. So I worked a lot. At some points,
Hmm.
I had three jobs. And so I wasn't super social at school because I would go to school and then go to work and then
Yeah.
go to school and
And
then
go to work. Yeah.
so I didn't really have that social aspect of it, but my classes and my professors and the people who the other students in those classes, we did have the same interests. Most of them did look like me. I majored in Latin American and border studies, and so there were a few of us who were in that major, mostly Latinas. Um, but my classes and my professors were life-changing for sure.
Hmm.
I think learning about my culture, learning about, the history of politics, and identity and culture and, how we show up in the world, has informed every career, personal path that I've taken. Knowing who you are, where you come from, and what you're capable of is very powerful.
Super powerful.
Um, and yeah, I thank Southwestern for that every day. I don't feel like I really had a community until I started in the Capitol, my senior year of college.
Hmm.
I worked for a Latina. My chief of staff was Latino. He was from the same small West Texas town as my grandma, as it so happens. Um, and I was just around a lot more people who look like me and who had the same values as me and who were interested in the same nerdy political things that I was. And so that I think is when I really, met my stride and met my people. Um, that I think maybe that's what college was supposed to be like, but that's what I got
At the
at the
Capitol.
Capitol. So very
Great.
thankful.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. If you could change one thing about how we think about schooling or policing in Austin ISD, what would it be?
I think we've touched on it that it's not an individual, success or, one household or family or school or campus. It's all of us. Like if we could make um, a change or a wave in this town, it would be to make everyone care about our public schools, regardless of where their kids go to school or if they have kids at all, you
Hmm.
know. Um, because you're right, it's a public investment that benefits all of us.
Hmm.
And I wish more people would see it that way. Because like I said, it really is going to take all of us to really um, you know, turn the wheel and help us in this cultural climate in
Right.
this state and country.
Yeah. What legacy would you like to leave from your time on the board?
Um, I think that I would like to be remembered as someone who collaborated with all people and listened to all people, who knew when to compromise and how, but who also is very, um, who is very strong in their cultural identity as being a representative for Latinos and for Black and Brown people in general, for Black and Brown poor people. I'd like to, be someone who is remembered as holding that as the core value and tenet in all of my decisions, even when I'm compromising.
Mhm. So if it's okay, I wanted to ask you something a little bit more personal. So I know now that you and Trustee Gonzalez are married, two young leaders serving together on the board. It just seems like a really sweet story that two people are drawn together through this shared commitment to public education. So can you just share your meet cute?
Well, it wasn't so cute, I think, if you ask him, but it's cute now. Um, we met about 3 or 4 years ago when he was running. At the time, he was running against an incumbent. He was running against the school board president. Um, and he, was this amazing teacher. He was teacher of the year. I think like all of our teachers, he was kind of fed up during COVID, and he grew up here and went to our schools. His mom was a teacher for 30 something years. He has uncles and aunts and cousins who are teachers. And so he is very passionate about the school district. And I met with him, and, he told me his goals and everything. And he asked me to be his campaign manager, and I said no, because I think you're going to lose. And, I was just coming off of this really amazing win with our mayor, our mayor pro tem. And I was just like, I really just have this really hot streak right now. Like, I don't think I can do this. Like, this is a long shot, but like, good luck. Um, and he won. And we didn't really speak or anything after that one meeting until I called him, 2 years later, and I was like, hey, so like I'm running for school board, would love your endorsement. And he's very graceful and very kind. And he said absolutely he would endorse me. Um, and even then, we were just still very friendly. Obviously, I quit my job to run. That I ran my campaign on my own, like fundraised everything. And so obviously, I had a lot g going on during
Mhm.
that time. But then the after voting and everything was all said and done, then we, kind of started to spend more time together. And I think that it was kind of this feeling, like I've always heard people say, like, when you know,
Mhm.
which I always thought was like lame and just untrue, until I started spending more time with him, in a not professional way. And I was like, oh, this is what they mean. Like,
Yeah.
this is when you know, you know. And yeah, so we started seeing each other, and then, I think once we figured out that it was the real deal, then, we told other people. We didn't want to tell anyone until we knew. We didn't want to make people mad until we really had to. Um, and we were together for 3 months, and he proposed, and then 3 months after that, we were married in Lake Tahoe, on June 20th.
That's such a great story. Congratulations. That's an amazing story. Yeah, so I also want to say I know that the past few weeks have been really hard for you both after the fire that destroyed Andrew's home. And I saw how the community immediately came together to support you through the GoFundMe, which I will link in this post. And I think it just says so much about how deeply people value the work that you're both doing. So how are you both doing right now, and what has that support meant to you?
Um, we're both very devastated.
Yeah.
Um, it is, I mean, I had a tough time growing up. I was in a tough environment.
Hmm.
I was around tough people, but this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Okay.
And I feel very lucky to have him, through this process. I don't know what I would do without him, honestly. Um, but yeah, you're right. People have really wrapped their arms around us, and it's overwhelming. I don't think I fully processed the tragedy that has happened. But, and then I can't, fully digest how much people love us. And
Yeah.
I just, I had no idea. Um, and, and he'll say it. He'll say like, wow, we are so loved. We're
Yeah.
so lucky.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, you're right. This is beyond anything I could ever imagine.
Hmm.
And it just feels good, to know that the town that we love so much, loves us back.
Hmm.
It's a really good feeling.
Hmm. Well, I'm so sorry for the loss of your dear pets and the whole trauma that you both are going through right now. I'm just sending care and love your direction, and I'm so glad that you feel the love from the community and that you're both so highly valued. So the last question, you've lived in Austin ISD from every side, student, alum, and now trustee. When you think about that full circle, what does public education mean to you today?
Public education is the bedrock to democracy, plain and simple.
Hmm.
I knew that before, but as we've seen the world change around us, we we know that even more. We know that the attacks on public education is an attack on democracy, is an attack on people having the resources they need to vote, to, having the resources they need to have the spare time to go out into their community and to rally and to organize and to protest. Um, and so public education is everything to everyone, whether they benefit from it or not. So it's just only reinforced what I already knew is that we have to fight even harder, we have to fight together. Um, because if we let public education get away from us, that's just the beginning of the end
Hmm.
in this democracy.
Yeah, I could not have said it better. I totally 100% agree with that. And I just want to say thank you so much, Trustee Quintana, for taking the time. I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation. And best of luck as y'all rebuild your home, and also best of luck with all of the hard decisions you're going to have to make on the board over the next few months.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.